The Legacy of Phrecia is back in another event league, which is going to last for 3 weeks, and it begins towards the end of this month on January 29th. Now, if you're yearning for some PoE 1, but you want some fresh content, this is going to be an event for you, because there's actually going to be quite a lot of new additions to this event, and some changes which are going to spice up the game quite a bit. Firstly, the 19 alternate Ascendancies are returning, but they're going to be undergoing a balance pass, the details of which will be revealed in a future patch note post before the event launches. This on its own is quite exciting because the Phrecia Ascendancies were far from balanced, and several of them were extremely underwhelming, so it's likely we'll be seeing some pretty big buffs to the underperforming Ascendancies and some nerfs to the overperformers. For example, the Ancestral Commander and Scavenger are likely to be in line for some nerfs, whilst the Behemoth and Polytheist should be seeing some buffs. If you're not familiar with those alternate Ascendancies because you didn't play the first iteration of the Legacy of Phrecia, I'll link my videos going over most of those Ascendancies in a deep dive in the description below if you're interested in those. Now, the balance pass to these Ascendancies isn't the only new part of the event, because GGG are also adding map modifiers to each zone, scaling up based on the zone level to increase the general difficulty of the event. And there will also be additional mechanics for bosses, both campaign and pinnacle, and on top of that, unique monsters will also enrage at low life, presumably gaining more damage and some haste mechanics, or perhaps a bit of both. The extra mechanics for the bosses are likely to be the same ones from the Gauntlet, so expect some crazy stuff in those boss arenas. Now, that's the new addition specifically to the event, but that's not the only part that will be different between the original Phrecia event and this one, because alongside the Ascendancy balance changes, I'm really looking forward to the fact that this will be played on the 3.27 version of the game, because that means that we'll not only be able to access Bloodline classes and mix and match them with the Phrecia Ascendancies, but we'll also be able to use Foulborn unique items. That means that with all of these things combined, there's going to be a ton of new possible combinations to explore, with many new builds popping up. The announcement of this event kind of came out of nowhere, so I didn't really have anything planned, and I instead thought it would be fun in this video to just dump a bunch of initial ideas that I thought of for builds and mechanic interactions, considering the new combinations of Ascendancies with Bloodlines and Foulborn uniques. So let's get straight into it, beginning with the Scavenger and debuff expiry rate. So debuff expiry rate has become a more valuable stat in 3.27 due to the buff to the Embrace Madness skill on the Beacon of Madness boots. Now, these boots are quite powerful, they've always been quite good, but they've been very high investment. You gain these very strong buffs here for actually having that skill active. And there's 3 different types of the boots. You can use one that has the double damage there, 20% chance to deal double damage, and you also gain 15 maximum fortification while the skill's active. And you gain these other ones as well here. There's one, for example, with all damage inflicts poison, that's quite strong. And these really strong buffs here are only active when the skill is active, but whilst the skill's active, you gain debuffs at a particular interval. The debuffs on here are really, really bad. For example, Eroding Touch. You take 6% increased damage per stack. Now, that doesn't sound like too much, but when you consider this is a debuff that stacks up to 10, and every new addition of the debuff refreshes the duration of all existing debuffs, it actually gets quite bad there. You can get up to 60% increased damage taken, 60% reduced action speed, and then all of this flask stuff and the reduced recovery rate modifiers. These are really dangerous to use if you don't have a way to solve the debuffs. However, in patch 3.27, this skill was buffed, and instead of applying a debuff every 1 second, it applies a debuff every 2 seconds. That means that you need to invest less into faster debuff expiry rate to actually have this a manageable amount. For example, the breakpoints here of 150% or just over 150%, the debuffs will last for 8 seconds, and therefore you're going to have an average of about 2 debuffs of each kind on you at any one time. Now, the Scavenger has a notable called Stasis Prison, and that's based on the unique of the same name, and that grants 50% faster expiry rate of debuffs, so there's potential here to actually gain enough debuff expiry rate where you can obtain this threshold here of 150% or just over that, without actually using your amulet slot for the Warped Timepiece. Now, most of these builds use the Warped Timepiece because it's actually quite a good amulet. You know, it grants you some boost to attack speed, cast speed, movement speed. There is the reduced skill effect duration there, which can be a downside for most builds, but some builds can actually take advantage of that one as well. But the main reason that you're using the amulet is for that huge amount of faster debuff expiry rate, 100%. That's a lot from one item. But if you can free up the amulet slot, there's a lot of potential power unlocked there, because the amulet slot is just incredibly valuable. And you'll be able to do that with the Scavenger Ascendancy. For example, you get 50% from the Ascendancy, then you can get 20% from the Soul of Arakali upgraded Pantheon, which brings the total to 70%. Then you can use the Rune Graft of the Warp for another 30%, that brings the total to 100%. Then there's the Window of Opportunity Cluster and the Mastery there for 15% on each modifier for a total 30%, that would bring you up to 130%. And then you can get the last 23% or so from the Temporal Rift Gem, which has that as the quality stat. If you get this to a 23% corrupted quality, you would then have 153% faster debuff expiry rate on yourself. And that means you achieve that without using the amulet slot, so that is potentially quite strong and something you could look at using in this patch, using the Beacon of Madness boots without making use of the Warp's Timepiece. Remember, there are other ways there to get debuff expiry. I didn't mention all of them. You can look through this page right here. I'll link that in the description below. Next up on the random list of ideas here is the Daughter of Oshabi Ascendancy, life stacking with the Forest Tracking Notable. So there's a notable there on the Daughter of Oshabi called Forest Tracking, and it makes you have increased attack damage based on evasion rating. And there's actually some really interesting items that came into the game in patch 3.27 to make this a real build. And the first one is the Grey Wind, which is a unique axe. This is not a Foulborn item, but it does come from the new breach mechanics. It comes from that boss. And this one grants attacks with this weapon have added fire damage equal to 8 to 12% of player maximum life. So you get a bunch of flat damage there for scaling up your life. And you can add to that the Foulborn Perfect Form or the Foulborn Snowblind Grace. Both of those grant flat evasion from maximum life. So basically, you can scale up your maximum life and you gain a bunch of flat damage and you gain a bunch of flat evasion, and then you just scale that damage and evasion with modifiers that increase both of those stats. And in total, you gain a bunch of defense from your evasion and life combined, and then you also gain a huge amount of damage. Flat damage from the Grey Wind and scaling damage from the Ascendancy. So that is definitely something you could look at. Keep in mind that the Perfect Form does have the Acrobatics Keystone, but you can also remove that Acrobatics Keystone with another Foulborn modifier that replaces it with Ghost Arms. So that means that you don't have to give up your spell suppression. Next up, we have the Herald Ascendancy for the Witch, and there's just a concept here with basic Herald stacking. This is nothing special. We have the new Herald that came into the game in patch 3.27. You can only get it from the Lost Unity Ring. It's called Herald of the Hive, but it does count as another Herald skill, and that Herald actually grants you more damage based on the amount of Heralds you have active on you. So it's 3% more damage per Herald skill affecting you. And obviously you can just stack up all the Heralds because you have massive mana reservation efficiency for Herald skills. You can't use auras on that Ascendancy, so that is quite a big downside. But there is something you could do there. You could even focus on the damage of Herald of the Hive specifically, because there are some modifiers on the Herald Ascendancy. For example, you can grant it base crit, which could be something you could look into. But even just stacking Heralds to deal damage with another skill makes a lot of sense here. You can then look at the Lycia Ascendancy, which grants you more effects of Heralds based on the mana that each Herald reserves. And that is kind of counter synergy because of the increased mana reservation efficiency on the Herald Ascendancy, but it will still likely provide quite a powerful boost to damage because you'll be gaining a lot of extra damage, both flat and extra, from the basic Heralds, and also the scaling from Herald of the Hive. Now, the other thing that you can look at on the Herald is the other half of the Lycia Ascendancy notable, which grants more damage with minions from Herald skills based on life reservation from that skill. In patch 3.27, there was a new Foulborn unique added to the game, Esh's Visage, and that one has the modifier that chaos damage does not bypass energy shield as long as you're not on low mana, and if you actually combine that item with blood magic, you don't have any mana and therefore you are never on low mana. Therefore, you gain a way to actually reserve life to begin with without losing efficiency on that reservation, and you also get to kind of scale your energy shield up without worrying about chaos damage, without using your body armor or anything like that. So that's an interesting combination you can look at, and in this patch is going to be particularly strong because the Herald is so good at scaling damage with Herald of Agony. That's because it has the Scourge notable for plus 25 to maximum virulence. That's the bonus that you kind of scale up there as you poison more and more targets and inflict more poisons. Your Crawler deals more and more damage. It's an ascendancy that's kind of themed around Vile skills and blood magic and things like that. Now the interesting thing about this is that a lot of the nodes on this ascendancy were taken as inspiration for the Chaos bloodline. Now the fact that you have both of these existing at the same time in the same patch is kind of interesting because the Chaos bloodline has some of the same stats repeating, and that means you're going to be able to get some of those stats up to quite high amounts. The Depose Order notable on the Architect of Chaos grants you 50% reduced soul gain prevention duration. That is a lot of that stat already. And then the Chaos bloodline has the Choice notable, and one of those choices is the Priest of Yaumak, which is another 20% reduced soul gain prevention duration. Now that will bring your soul gain prevention duration down to just 30% of its baseline. So there's definitely potential there to do some shenanigans with Vile skills, where you can basically chain Vile skill into Vile skill. Now moving on to another life stacking angle is the Behemoth. Now I will mention that the Behemoth is likely to undergo some pretty big changes in the patch notes because this was one of the weakest ascendancies. It was an ascendancy that barely got played at all in that patch, so this one is likely to change. But the Behemoth has the Steel Willed notable there, which is 2% increased attack damage per 450 armor, and once again you can do the same thing that I mentioned earlier with the Daughter of Oshabi, which is you can stack life along with the Grey Wind, therefore you gain a bunch of flat damage from the Grey Wind, and then you can also use the Perfect Form or the Snowblind Grace there with the Foulborn modifier that makes it so that you gain flat evasion based on your life, and then you use Iron Reflexes to turn that evasion into armor, and that means you can do the same kind of life stacking angle that I mentioned earlier, but you do it with armor instead. But once again, there's likely to be quite a few changes to the Behemoth Ascendancy. Now, let's move on to the Ancestral Commander, which is another ascendancy that's likely to be nerfed quite a bit. And the main thing that I want to mention on this ascendancy is the potential for ridiculous endurance charge stacking. So, you have 3 baseline on your character, then you can gain 3 from the passive tree, and you can gain 3 from the Ancestral Endurance node on the Ancestral Commander, for a total of 9. Then, from your gear, you can gain 1 from the Arn's Anguish Belt, which is 10. Then you can gain 1 to 2 from your weapon. For example, you can use the Foulborn Counter's Primacy for 1, or you can use the Eventuality Rod, which is a high space type, that also gives you 1. And if you use the Eventuality Rod, you can make it Shaper Influence to gain another 1 on an explicit modifier. That's how you get 2 from the weapon. Then you can use the Foulborn Ambu's Charge for another +1 maximum. Then there's your ring slots for +2, 1 on each. And if you're using Arn's Anguish, you're obviously going to be using Radakesh's Impatience, so you can benefit from the Endurance Charge scaling and the Brutal Charge scaling. But you can also corrupt those boots for another +1 from the boot slot. And you could even consider using the Sublime Vision for Determination for another 1 maximum. That would limit you to just the Determination aura. But you can see that's a ridiculous amount of endurance charges. I think the average build that would be doing endurance charge stacking is probably going to be sitting around 14 or 15 charges. But you can get up to 17, I think, or something like that, which is just ridiculous. That's just kind of crazy. Now, lastly for this video, and I will likely be doing more of these videos, but this was just a kind of rundown of some of the initial ideas I had, there is the Whisperer Ascendancy, and there's one meme thing that you can do there, which is stealth stacking, because there's also the Oshabi bloodline that came into the game. This ascendancy grants you 100% increased stealth. The Oshabi one grants you 50% increased stealth while you have elusive. And there's other ways to gain stealth as well. Stealth is just this stat where you can attack things if you're ranged, and those things just don't react at all because they're out of vision range. So you just hit them and deal damage, but they don't even chase you, they don't attack you. As long as you have a long enough range away from them and you can hit them, then you can just kind of kill things without them even aggroing onto you. But that is kind of a meme. The other thing that I wanted to mention here on the Whisperer Ascendancy is mana stacking, of course, because that was one of the strongest endgame builds in the last Phrecia event. And there is the new Foulborn Choir of the Storm, which has the modifier mana is increased by 50% of overcapped lightning resistance. So there's the potential there to do some kind of resistance stacking, mana stacking angle there on the Whisperer. But anything you plan out, obviously, hold off a little bit with the full plan because there's likely to be some changes in those patch notes for the Ascendancies. The Whisperer, for example, could be one of the Ascendancies that is getting changed, as it was quite strong in that endgame phase. But that is going to be it for this kind of initial video with some opening thoughts. I will be doing more of these, probably more in depth with some fleshed out ideas. But I'm pretty hyped to log into the Phrecia event. What do you guys think of the Phrecia event? Are you going to log in and play? Let me know by commenting below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.